What is going on, YouTube? This is Ask the Root. So I'm going to review an EP by Ice Cube. Basically, this project was called Kill It Will, and it came out at the tail end of 1990. This was back when Ice Cube was kind of doing more Politico type rap in the early 90s with stuff like America's Most Wanted, Death Certificate, and The Predator, and some of that type of stuff. This was after he defected from NWA and started his solo career and that type of stuff. So this is kind of an interesting fold for that. Still kind of has some mild kind of NWA type vibes about it, but it's different in the sense that Ice Cube was just proving that he could do it by himself, and this is an example of that. But 1990 was a pretty big year for Ice Cube, I would definitely say, and it seemed like he got a number of hit singles. Now I don't know a ton about like the album that came out before that. I want to say that was Ice Cube's debut, America's Most Wanted. Don't know a bunch about that. I know more about Ice Cube from like The Predator forward, and I know a little bit more about Lethal Injection also, but some of these earlier ones I don't know as much about, like Death Certificate and America's Most Wanted in this project. So it's a pretty hit project here. I would have to say it has some good gems on here. I mean, for 7 songs, which is really 6 songs minus like an interlude on here, I'd say I wound up recommending to you 3 of them. I feel like it's pretty solid enough type atmosphere. Has 2 singles, which Wikipedia didn't list the singles off this project, but it does have 2, and those 2 singles would be the 2 singles are Jackin' for Beats and then Dead Homies, both of which are pretty hit songs. Definitely think they're worth purchasing just for those 2 songs alone. But like most EPs, the briefness of it kind of depicts the fact that you're probably going to want more product from what you get off of these particular musicians. But I do feel like enough of this project has a I mean, it's not a full blown classic in my opinion, but it's good enough to warrant paying like the 8, 7, 8 bucks, something like that for it. So it's definitely kind of the concept. I mean, I would have to say for like the time, I kind of like I said, I don't know an overabundance about Ice Cube before 1992. So this is kind of interesting. Some of these more stark and kind of West Coast kind of boom bap type beats that were kind of more in like a similarity to like Public Enemy and like NWA and like Digital Underground and some of those type folks. It's just interesting kind of get that because Ice Cube was a product of the West Coast. Even Ice Cube was always like a product of the West Coast and stuff. So it's just interesting kind of get some of these. But I'm just kind of underneath the impression where I just have to say that from what I've seen about like this early kind of Ice Cube and stuff, it just kind of continues to give me like NWA type vibes, just kind of in a more solo type tip as far as that kind of goes. I'm just curious as to how some of these earlier albums like Death Certificate and America's Most Wanted are going to stack up. Eventually, I will get to those. I definitely want to review Lethal Injection, but just to kind of say about some of these. So the 2 singles were the first single I'm going to assume was Jackin' for Beats, and this one. So the first single off this project was Jackin' for Beats, and basically this project has a number of beats that it rips from folks like LL Cool J and Public Enemy and some of those type folks. And I don't know the songs that well just because I'm not wholesomely aware of like some of the earlier 80s type rap songs and that type of stuff. But I would say this is a pretty nice song for an eventful day. It's just kind of a multifaceted type song just for having a bunch of events that kind of go along. It rips at least 4 different or 5 different beats on here, so it kind of does that. Definitely feels like a multifaceted day. Pretty similar to like Eazy-E's Easier Said Than Done song from his Easy Does It album from 1988. It has similarities to that, where that was kind of a multifaceted verse where it just had different elements of going throughout Eazy-E's day as far as that kind of went. I feel like this is another song for that. Maybe you start off the song just kind of cruising in the car, and then you go to a gas station, get some beers, then you go by a buddy's house and smoke like a maybe you go by a buddy's house and smoke like a blunt, something like that, and like get like a lemonade or something like that, and then you call your girlfriend, something like that. There's those kind of moments at like a payphone, some of that type mixture as far as that kind of goes. Just a multifaceted kind of tune. I do like some of these, but they just take longer to get used to. Like I almost said that I didn't like Jackin' for Beats, but I did eventually wind up liking it. But it was one that was kind of almost on the fence about, and in some cases almost didn't like it at all. But I'm glad that I did. I just feel like these multifaceted kind of multi-beat kind of verse type songs just take more getting used to for me. But I did like this one. It's really kind of filled with like cityscaping and kind of funkish bounce, where I feel like the first 2 verses for the most part are kind of more cityscaping and kind of bustling kind of feels towards it. It's going to have some of that Public Enemy and NWA type feels, and then the last second half of the second verse and then the third verse kind of has more funkish bounce towards it, which is just kind of more smoke session type fare. So it's just interesting kind of get that, where you can kind of be in the car, kind of laying low in the cut, smoking a blunt, that type of stuff, just kind of going around cityscaping, that sort of stuff as far as that kind of goes. Just an overall good bop. Definitely like this one. It's just an overall highlight that Ice Cube pulled off pretty well, and it does have a music video towards it, so I would check that out. But then I would also say the second single, Dead Homies, this is probably, in my opinion, one of the best songs on here, if not the best song. I feel like both the singles are excellent, but I think I probably like Dead Homies a little bit more. Dead Homies is a pretty good highlight. This just feels like a drowsy saloon-like tune. This really feels like some early G-Funk type stuff, and it just kind of has like a lot of Lazy Day kind of vibes about it. It's very similar to like the stuff. I mean, there's been rap songs from like the early 90s and late 80s that I've heard like this. I can't think of all of them, but this really feels like a mellow, kind of very drowsy and sleepy kind of tune as far as like this. This feels like a really drowsy and kind of sleepy kind of beat as far as that kind of goes and stuff. It's very similar to some of those type vibes, but the thing about it is with this song being about dead homies and your buddies that have passed away just either through violence or just other acts of just not being here. It just kind of has the concept of just being kind of a remembrance and kind of that type tune. But I just like the overall feel towards it. Just kind of been like a kind of overcast and just kind of sleepy kind of day that just kind of has like some groggy and just drowsy kind of energy overall. So it's just a good highlight, just a real good tune for that sort of concept, just of a more mellowish kind of day. Probably in the top two of the best songs on this project, I would have to say. The only other song I recommend out of these 6 songs left over to recommend would be Get Off My Dick and Tell Your Bitch to Come Here, which is basically like a song that was on America's Most Wanted, but it was just 50 seconds on that particular album. So Ice Cube made a full-blown song out of it on this project and EP. This one's just kind of a nice, warm day and kind of bustling song. It just kind of feels like an unsung kind of ladies cut, just kind of an out and about kind of tune, and just has a lot of similar vibes to like NWA's type stuff, especially the stuff from Straight Outta Compton. This really feels like something like 100 Miles and Running or one of those type ones. I can't think of like the hit songs from Straight Outta Compton, but one of the singles from that particular project, this maybe even Straight Outta Compton, the title track, but just one of those type ones that just kind of has a lot more bustle. Maybe Gangsta Gangsta is pretty similar to that one too. So it just kind of has that kind of concept as far as that kind of goes. But it's just an overall kind of cityscaping kind of highlight, and just kind of has like, it's like I said, it's a very unsung kind of song for the ladies, but I do like the concept of just kind of getting that one. That this is an overall highlight. But talk about the 3 songs on here that I didn't enjoy, which would just be Endangered Species, Tales from the Dark Side, and then The Product, and then I Gotta Say What Up. So I didn't like I Gotta Say What Up just because that wasn't really much of a song. It was just Ice Cube shouting out people that he was wanting to shout out. And it was kind of supposed that, like, Wikipedia says that this is supposed to be a diss song towards NWA, but it wasn't much of a diss because there weren't really any verses, just Ice Cube kind of shouting out people. So I almost would have liked that one, but I just couldn't get enough gumption behind it to really back this project. Just didn't have a lot to it. The Product had a pretty poor beat. This one was a pretty awful beat on here. It was just kind of trying to be like a cityscaping tune that just sounded more bustling and busy than it needed to. It had a lot of busyness fair towards it, but it just didn't have like the correct kind of compelling production to really make it worthwhile and being bustling. And then it's the same problem with Endangered Species, Tales from the Darkness, or Tales from the Dark Side. I kind of feel like that this was just another one that kind of had like some riveting energy that just was not actually riveting. It's just trying to be like a bustling kind of going throughout the city kind of traverse type tune, but this didn't really pull it off as well. This was not quite as boppish as like the one that was Get Off My Dick and Tell Your Bitch to Come Here, and then both those were pretty poor production. So I just would have to say, but I am interested to check out Ice Cube's America's Most Wanted project. But I would definitely say, because back in the day, having 2 singles on an EP was like a big thing, and I just feel like Ice Cube was so huge back in 1990. This is just a huge product of something to kind of fuck with. So I definitely feel like purchasing this project for Jackin' for Beats and Dead Homies is a wise choice, because both those are pretty hit singles, and they're just very potent singles at that. They just have a lot of potency that this is kind of like, for me originally thinking that I wasn't sure if I would have liked Ice Cube before The Predator when he got meshed with G-Funk and some of that type of stuff. It was kind of a pleasant surprise to see that there were some old school kind of more West Coast boom bap type beats that I actually enjoy. So that's a pretty good product to be able to get that. But me liking 3 songs out of 6 on here, I'm gonna go ahead and give this EP like a 6.25 out of 10, because I feel like that's about half. But I just kind of feel like because there were 2 singles and 2 of which were remixes that were on an album already, I kind of feel like it's just kind of, I want to give this more of the benefit of the doubt. I feel like it's above average, but it probably could have used at least another hit song. I mean, The Product, which was a new song, was kind of a disappointment, so I had to slash the score somewhat. And then I gotta say what up. If that would have been a diss song towards NWA, I probably would have liked it more. But I don't know if I want to say that No Vaseline was actually on Death Certificate. I'm not really sure, but just the concept of it is just kind of it's I mean this project is somewhat patchy, but it's good. It's at least good in the right direction of being good. So I like the concept. So 6.25 out of 10. The social score I'll give like a 7.75 out of 10 because 2 hit singles, a lot of good bustling kind of energy and a lot of cityscaping kind of vibes, just in like some West Coast kind of highlights as far as that kind of goes. It's just an early kind of signature kind of trailblazer for West Coast rap as far as that was kind of going, separating Ice Cube from NWA and getting his career paved out more and that type of stuff, and just being able to have these hits and get a lot more West Coast anthems as far as that kind of goes. This is good to get that 7.75 social. In terms of the future, like Ice Cube has dropped an album with like the Mount Westmore, which came out in like late 2022, but he's been kind of quiet lately. He did drop an album back in 2018 called Everything's Corrupt that I want to mess with, but this is some good stuff here, and it's definitely, like I said, this is pretty gem-ish just because of the 2 singles on here. Dead Homies is definitely a highlight, and then Jackin' for Beats is pretty rock solid also. So